Hello everyone, my name is Pravesh Agrawal and I am a third year BTech CSE student at Bennett University. Today I am going to discuss about software development lifecycle. Let's start with an introduction.
SDLC stands for Software Development Lifecycle. It is a process that consists of a series of planned activities which aim to develop or alter the software product. It also aims to produce a high quality software that meets or exceeds customer expectation, reaches completion within time and cost estimate. It is a process which is followed by a software project within a software organization. It consists of detailed planning, describing how to develop, maintain, replace, and alter or enhance a specific software. Moving on to the history of SDLC. The System Lifecycle or SLC is a type of methodology which is used to describe the process for building an information system or which intend to develop an information system in a very deliberate or a structured way. Ever since, according to Elliott 2004, the traditional life cycle approaches to system development have been increasingly replaced with alternative approaches and frameworks which attempt to overcome some of the inherent deficiencies of the traditional SDLC models. So, what are the phases of SDLC? So, the phases of a software development lifecycle are requirement analysis, designing, implementation, testing, and maintenance. Let's discuss each of these phases in detail. So, the first phase is requirement gathering and analysis. It is the most important and necessary stage in an SDLC. The senior members of the team perform it with inputs from all the stakeholders and domain experts in the industry. Planning for the quality assurance requirements and identification of the risk associated with the project is also done in this stage. For example, a client wants to have an application which concerns money transactions. So, in this method, the requirement has to be precise, like what kind of operations will be done, how it will be done, and in which currency it will be done. So, moving on to the next phase, which is the designing phase. In this phase, the system and the software design is prepared from the requirement specification, which was studied in the first phase. The system designs helps in specifying the hardware and the system requirements, which were defined in the first phase, as well as it also helps in defining the overall system architecture. The system design specifications serve as an input for the next phase of the model. Now, moving on to the next phase, which is the implementation and the coding. This phase is also defined as a development of the project. In this phase, the actual development begins and the programming is built. The implementation of design begins concerning with the writing of code. Developers have to follow the coding guidelines described by their management, and the programming tools like compilers, interpreters are used to develop and implement this code. Since this phase is produced, so it is the main focus for the developer as the coding is done in this phase. Now moving on to the next phase, which is the testing phase. After the code is developed, it is tested against the requirements to make sure that the product is actually solving the needs addressed and gathered during the requirement phase. During this phase, unit testing, integration testing, system testing, and acceptance testing are done. So let's discuss the final stage of the SDLC lifecycle, which is the maintenance. Once when the customer starts using the developed system, then the actual problem comes up, which needs to be solved from time to time. So this process where the care is taken from the developed product is known as the maintenance phase. So now let's discuss the various models of SDLC. So the first model which we are going to discuss is waterfall. The waterfall model was introduced by Winston Royce in 1970. This model has five phases, which are requirement analysis and specification, designing, implementation, unit testing, integration and system testing, and operation and maintenance. The steps always follow in this order and do not overlap. The developer must complete every phase before the next phase begins. This model is named waterfall because it's a diagrammatic representation which resembles a cascade of waterfall, as we can see on the image on the right hand side. Now, we can discuss some of the advantages and disadvantages of the waterfall model. So, moving on with the advantages, this model is simple to implement and also the number of resources that are required for it is minimal. The requirements are simple and explicitly declared. They remain unchanged during the entire project development. The start and the endpoint for each phase is fixed, which makes it easy to cover progress. The release date for the complete product as well as its final cost can be determined before the development. It gives easy to control and clarity for customer due to a strict reporting system. Now the disadvantages are in this model the risk factor is higher. So this model is not suitable for more significant and complex projects. This model cannot accept the changes in requirement during the development. It becomes tough to go back to the phase, for example, if the application has now shifted to the coding phase and there is a change in requirement. It becomes tough to go back and change it. Since the testing done at a later stage, it does not allow identifying the changes and the risk in the earlier phases. So the risk reduction strategy is difficult to prepare. Now, moving on to the next model, which is incremental. Incremental model is a process of software development where requirements are divided into multiple standalone modules of the software development cycle. In this module, in this model, each module goes through the requirements, design, implementation, and testing phases. Every subsequent release of the module adds function to the previous release. The process continues until the complete system is achieved. So, some of its advantages are errors are easy to be recognized, easier to test and debug. It is one of the more flexible option than the traditional or the waterfall model. The kind the client gets important functionality early. And some of its disadvantages are need for good planning, total cost is higher, and well-defined module interfaces are needed. The next model is iterative. Iterative model can start with some of the software specification and develop the first version of the software. After the first version, if there is a need to change the software, there is a new version of the software which is created with a new iteration. Every release of the iterative model finishes in an exact and fixed period that is called iteration. The iterative model allows the accessing earlier phases in which the variations were made respectively. The final output of the project is renewed at the end of the software development cycle. Now, moving on to some of its advantages is testing and debugging during small iteration is easy. A parallel development can be planned in the iterative model. It is easy to accept of all the ever-changing needs of the project. Risks are identified and resolved during iteration. Limited time is spent on documentation and extra time is spent on designing. Now some of its disadvantages are it is not suitable for smaller projects. More resources may be required. Design can be changed again and again because of imperfect requirements. Requirement changes can cause over budget and project completion date cannot be confirmed because of changing requirements. Also, if we compare iterative versus incremental model, then an incremental approach breaks the software development process into smaller and manageable portions known as increments, and each increment builds on the previous version so that the improvements are made step by step. Whereas an iterative model means software development activities which are symmetrically repeated in cycles known as iterations. A new version of the software is produced after each iteration until the optimum product is achieved. Now, moving on to the next model, which is Spiral. The Spiral model is a risk driven software development process model which is based on the unique unique risk pattern of a given product. The spiral model guides a team to adopt elements of one or more process models such as incremental, waterfall, or evolutionary prototyping. Some of its advantages are changing requirements can be accommodated. It allows for extensive use of prototypes. Requirements can be captured more accurately, and the users can see the system early. And some of its disadvantages are management is more complex, end of project may not be known early, not suitable for low risk projects, and projects can be expensive as well as they can be complex. Now, moving on to the next model, which is RAD, which stands for Rapid Application Development. This model is based on prototyping and iterative model with no or less specific planning. In general, RAD approach to software development means putting lesser emphasis on planning tasks and more emphasis on development and coming up with a prototype. Some of its advantages are the time to deliver is less as we are creating a prototype. Changing requirement can be accommodated and the progress can be measured. Now moving on to the disadvantages, management complexity is more, resource requirement may be more, so it is suitable for the systems that are component based and scalable, as well as it is suitable only when the requirements are well known. Now, moving on to the last model, which is the agile development. Agile software development is a combination of iterative and incremental process, which focus on process adaptability and customer satisfaction by rapid delivery of working software product. Agile methods break the product into small incremental builds, and these builds are provided in iterations. So, some of the advantages of agile development are it promotes teamwork and cross training. The functionality can be developed rapidly and demonstrated. Resource requirements are minimum, as well as a proper documentation is followed during the agile development. Now, some of its disadvantages are it is not suitable for handling complex dependencies, and more risk of sustainability is there, as well as maintaining and extensibility is difficult. An overall plan, an agile leader, and an agile PM practice is a must without which it will not work. In the end, if we want to conclude, we can say that software development lifecycle is the process of developing information system through analysis, planning, designing, implementation, integration, maintenance, and testing of software applications. There are many scopes of restriction, but there can be many progressive enhancement as well as it works on predefined structure and incremental planning at each of the stages.